Hi, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Steven.
Steven, somebody new. Can you
Yes.
introduce yourself to us?
Hi, everyone. I'm Steven Rong. I'm originally from Virginia, but I've been living in Taiwan for the past 10 years. So my Chinese, I was telling Karen earlier, I'm half Aboriginal, which means my mother, she was from a tribe called the Cockatiel tribe. So that's why I'm living in Taiwan now and happy to be here.
Yeah, and on your father's side, you're also a mainlander
Yes.
via Kaohsiung.
Mm-hmm.
So he has a really, really interesting background. We'll have to hear more about it sometime when we have the chance. Today, our article, which is in two parts, is called, and by the way, it's October 15th today, and we're on page 42. Our article is entitled, X Marks the Spot in Treasure Island.
Ooh, sounds exciting.
All right. And this is an all-English program, so we're not going to translate it for you. But X marks the spot is kind of a cliche in English. And when we say this, what picture pops into your mind?
Automatically, I think of a map, and on the map there is a red X.
Exactly.
And leading to the X is like a dotted dashed line. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And what is at the X?
At the X is hopefully where you find treasure.
And that's what we're talking about today because this whole thing probably originated with a novel by Robert Louis Stevenson, we'll hear about him in the article, entitled Treasure Island. Ooh. So that's our title. So X marks the spot in Treasure Island, and I'll start us off. Robert Louis Stevenson was an internationally acclaimed author, famous for his adventure novels and travel writings. Stevenson was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1850. From early childhood, he suffered from poor health due to problems with his lungs. This issue would affect him for the remainder of his life. Surprisingly, he didn't learn to read until he was 7 years old. Although he may have gotten a late start, Stevenson eventually fell in love with literature. He became obsessed with writing his own stories in his adolescence. In addition to writing, Stevenson also developed a love for travel. During his life, he traveled extensively through Australia, the U.S., and France, among other places.
Although he was intelligent, Stevenson didn't perform well in school. Due to his illness, he was absent from class a lot and had to receive his lessons from tutors. When Stevenson's health improved, he set his sights on pursuing a life of travel and adventure. He became a rebellious teen, growing his hair long and turning his back on religion. Stevenson would later turn to writing to express his ideas and share his travel experiences with others.
One of Stevenson's most famous works is Treasure Island. It is a coming-of-age story about a young man who sets out on a quest to find a chest of buried treasure on a tropical island. To capture the gold, however, he must get there before a crew of dangerous pirates. Stevenson came up with the idea for Treasure Island after he and his son drew an imaginary map on a rainy day. The novel was also influenced by his recent trip to America. Although it's a work of fiction, many of the characters are based upon real-life pirates such as Blackbeard and William Kidd. Now, this passage has left us hanging because it's not finished. We won't hear the second half of it until tomorrow, and we hope you tune in then. So we'll only just talk about it up to this point. We're now going to go back to the beginning. Our title again is X Marks the Spot in Treasure Island, and X is just the letter X, and that marks a place, so you know where to find something. Marks here is a verb. It marks the spot. Spot here means place. And Treasure Island, you will see, is in italics. So that is the title of the book that we're talking about today.
Have you read this book yet?
I have. I think I read a simplified version of it many, many years ago, and I'd forgotten many of the details. So I kind of looked at a summary of the novel on Wikipedia. It kind of refreshed my memory.
And
go ahead.
I think it's just interesting because I haven't read this book because I think it was it's back from a long time ago. But I should have read it because it's a classic. But I think it's interesting because the influence of this novel is always felt, even till now, with all the pirate movies and all those pirate imagery that you see often. Like, it's just very interesting how one piece of work from someone's imagination which started, like as it says in the third paragraph, it came from his rainy day with his son. Like it became an idea that has, survived all these years.
That's right. So at the time, it was based on real pirates, on real characters. But once Stevenson wrote this novel, it's sort of like he created the stereotypes of pirates that have survived until now.
And also what everyone thinks when you say the word pirate, you automatically imagine someone who has one leg and the other leg is wooden, right?
And they often have a patch over one eye.
Yeah, probably from an early fight, right? And
That's
also
right.
There's a parrot on their shoulders.
A parrot on their shoulder. And I like that part because I love parrots and I love birds in general, but especially birds who can talk, I think is really cool. But I wonder how he could stand that because parrots have very, very sharp claws.
I know. I have a cockatiel.
You're kidding.
Yes, and I always have to make sure his nails are trim. Otherwise, even though he's a lot smaller than a big-sized parrot, it still scratches you and you still have to watch out for it. So big parrots, I can imagine, can hurt sometimes.
They can. Parrots and owls, a lot of birds, and that's how they protect themselves. Can your cockatiel speak?
It can mimic a lot of sounds and whistles.
That is so neat.
Yeah, it's really cute.
I'll have to hear more about your cockatiel. Another stereotype is they're wearing this special kind of pirate's hat with a skull and crossbones on it.
It looks like the top of a sail from a boat, right? From a ship.
Right. That's right. A skull and crossbones. So you see the bone inside your head. After you die, all the skin is rotted away. You've got the bone left. That's a skull. And then you've got two bones, maybe from your arms or legs, and they are formed in an X. That's kind of a symbol for pirates. So these are some of our stereotypes, and a stereotype means just very, very common ideas of something, that something is a certain way. A lot of these came from Robert Louis Stevenson's book, Treasure Island. Okay, so back to the beginning. Robert Louis Stevenson was an internationally acclaimed author, famous for his adventure novels and travel writing. So first of all, we've established that Robert Louis Stevenson, he was really, really famous. He's a well-known author. He's internationally, that means all over the world, people know him. Acclaimed means that they have a high opinion of him, high praise for him. They think very highly of his works. And what kind of works is he famous for? First of all, adventure novels. And when I see that, I think of guys. Guys tend to like adventure novels. And also travel writings. We'll find out later or very soon that he loved to travel, so he wrote a lot about his travels to different countries. Stevenson was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1850. So now we know the period in which he lived. It was the middle of the 19th century, 1850, smack in the middle. And he was from Scotland. And this city name, watch out, a lot of Americans will say Edinburgh, which is okay, but Brits and Scottish people will say Edinburgh.
Edinburgh. And I think some people also say Edinburgh.
Oh, that's right. That sounds more authentic.
I remember one time I went to, it was in London, and I said, I think, it was Gloucester, but I said Gloucester.
Oh, and they laughed?
They did. Someone on the train looked at me and was like, oh, Gloucester. It's Gloucester. And I was like, I'm sorry.
You do great imitations. Okay, so now we know where Stevenson was from Edinburgh. You can say Edinburgh with an American accent, but because I've been corrected in a similar way many times, I say Edinburgh, and we know the time. So next sentence, from early childhood, he suffered from poor health due to problems with his lungs. And that was really true. This problem lasted his whole life, and it meant he was in bed a lot of the time. He had to write in bed. He was very sick, very weak, but he still was highly motivated. He wrote a lot. So from early childhood, this problem started when he was very, very young. He had poor health, not good health. He was sick because of problems with his lungs, his breathing. And if you've ever had respiratory problems, they often become chronic, C-H-R-O-N-I-C. C-H-R-O-N-I-C, chronic means?
It means to go on for a long time. It's not temporary. And it's hard when you have something in your lungs because you're always lying down. So in order to get all that phlegm, which is that really sticky substance, that mucus whenever you have a cold, in order to get that out of your lungs, you have to move around a bit. But when you're sick in bed, it's hard to get better.
That's right. So there are two words to watch out for. The first one was the one I just mentioned, chronic, C-H-R-O-N-I-C. That's an illness that just goes on and on and doesn't seem to get better. The opposite of chronic is acute, and that means a sudden illness or a very serious illness, but you might recover from it completely. It doesn't go on and on. That's spelled A-C-U-T-E. With being very kawaii, and it has nothing to do with that. So acute, that means it's
definitely not cute, right?
Right, it's not cute. So it's a disease that's often quite serious, but you often get over it completely. Mm-hmm. The other word is a word that Stephen mentioned, which is phlegm. And how do we spell phlegm?
Phlegm is P-H-L-E-G-M. Watch out for that silent G.
Exactly. And the PH also tells you that this word is probably from Greek. So that is a word from Greek, P-H-L-E-G-M, phlegm. That's all that sticky stuff that you cough up when you have a lung problem or a cold. Okay. All right. So problems with his lungs. The next sentence, this issue would affect him for the remainder of his life. That means it was a truly chronic illness. He never got over it. He had that illness up until his death, and he died fairly early. We'll probably find out later.
So the word issue there, I think, is quite interesting because a lot of people know for magazines, every month is a different issue. But the issue here means problem. So watch out for that.
Right. Surprisingly, he didn't learn to read until he was 7 years old. So that's kind of late. Usually we learn to read around
2, maybe 3.
Depends on the kid. You come from a Chinese background.
Yeah, so I started learning when I was 6 months. No,
exactly. That's how it works for Asian kids, right?
When you're in the womb, you already have to start reading. You have to start reading.
That's really true of a lot of Asian kids and other people as well. But we expect people to learn a little earlier. But because he was sick, he may not have gone to school when the other kids started school.
That must have been the reason.
Although he may have gotten a late start, Stevenson eventually fell in love with literature.
So when we say may have gotten a late start, why do we use may have gotten? It's because it's considered to be like that. We don't really know for sure if that's the reason. So that's why we use may have gotten. And Stevenson eventually fell in love with literature. In English, when we say we love something or the start of loving something, we say we fall in love. I've always really liked that expression. It makes you really imagine somebody helplessly falling in love with something.
That's right. And it's important in language learning and learning other things as well. I have a former student who wrote me an email recently, and that's the way he puts it, that if you want to learn something well, for example, English, you have to fall in love with something. He personally fell in love with a TV series called Frasier.
Okay.
And he loved that series so much, he wanted to sound like Frasier. So he practiced it all the time. Because he fell in love with it. When you fall in love with something, you are very motivated to learn it well.
Wow, that takes a lot of determination.
And a lot of love.
And a lot of love, definitely.
That's right. And although he may have gotten a late start, so one interpretation is we're not really sure. But the other interpretation is simply although. He did get a later start, but he made up for it later. So he may have doesn't always mean we don't know. It just means it's true compared to other people he started later. So it really just means although in some contexts.
And some people might be confused about the word eventually. Like, why is that needed there? Well, eventually is an adverb, and it means in the end or after a while. So here we don't really know exactly when he fell in love with literature, but it eventually happened.
Right. Something like sooner or later, and often it's later. Next sentence, he became obsessed with writing his own stories in his adolescence. To become obsessed with something means that you're so crazy about it, you're thinking about it all the time. To become obsessed with something, it's a good expression to know, but be careful about becoming obsessed with, for example, your phone, so you never leave your phone, or with things like drugs, and it's really dangerous.
Or with somebody.
Especially if they don't love you back.
Yeah, that's hard. That's rough.
That's really rough. And then you have to get over your obsession in order to become healthy again.
The obsession thing can get really bad if you don't keep it in check.
Exactly. So watch your obsessions. So if you become obsessed with English, you'll probably learn it better. So you kind of just have to practice a bit of moderation. All right. Adolescence is the period before you are an adult. So you're no longer a child. You're starting to turn into an adult. That period is called adolescence.
So basically any time before 17 could be considered adolescence, right?
That's right. Okay. And it's starting earlier and earlier now, I've noticed.
Because the internet is so easy. You have easy access and you grow up a lot faster. So
that's one reason. Another reason, maybe because of diet.
Oh, that's true.
And there's some people say it's because of hormones that they feed the animals and we eat the meat. And so girls and other, and boys as well end up maturing earlier.
And that's why a lot of people turn to organic food, organic meat, organic vegetables. And whether or not that really works, it at least puts a lot of people, it puts a peace in their mind. It puts peace at mind.
I think it's a good idea, to try to avoid any kind of additives. Next sentence. In addition to writing, Stevenson also developed a love for travel.
Ooh. So when you develop a love for something, it means you start to let this love grow for something. So in Stevenson's situation, he started to develop a love for traveling. He started to love this thing that he maybe became a little bit obsessed, I would say.
That's right. He traveled a lot, and then he wrote about the places that he visited. So in addition to writing, to is a preposition. So we use the ing form. That's called the gerund. So in addition to writing, please remember to use the ing form if you've got a preposition like to. Next sentence. During his life, he traveled extensively through Australia, the U.S., and France, among other places. So here are a few examples of the places that he went on his travels. But I'm sure there were a lot of other places because it says here extensively, which means
a long period of time and also a lot of places.
A lot of places. Yeah,
yes.
You go out, you're extending out. That means you're reaching out to lots of different places. And these are just a few examples.
And I think one thing I want to mention is the word through. When it comes to a lot of my non-English speaking friends, that word, that preposition is a little difficult for people to understand because it's not really evident, let's say, in Mandarin Chinese. So through, it's kind of like you're going through or you're just like in a whole area, let's just say there's a container. If you go through that container, you're going through the whole area of that container. You're not letting any stone be uncovered. You're just discovering it. You're doing everything you can. You're going everywhere you can. And then at the end of the sentence, among other places, that's just a way to say that there are other places that you don't feel like mentioning, maybe because of time, maybe because of, if you keep going, the list will be too long.
Right. The reader gets the idea.
Exactly.
That's right. To travel through, that means you go there, but you don't necessarily stay there a long time. All right. Next paragraph.
Although he was intelligent, Stevenson didn't perform well in school. So here we see the word perform. So in our minds, when we first hear the word perform, you might think that it's a performance. You're singing, you're dancing, but not in this sentence. Here it just means how well you do. So if I say I perform well at my job, that means I do well at my job.
And you do indeed.
Oh, well, thank you.
Next sentence.
The next sentence, due to his illness, he was absent from class a lot. So when we say we're absent from something, that means we're not there. The opposite of that is present in class. So just make sure, in school, whenever the teacher was doing the roll call, they'd be like, who is Karen here? Yeah, present. And then Stephen here, present. And if someone wasn't there, we would say that he was absent.
Except he can't say it himself.
Exactly. Someone next to him would have to, next to where he was supposed to be sitting would say it.
Right. And your body can be there, but sometimes your mind isn't. So they're kind of absent mentally, or we can say somebody is absent-minded. That means they keep forgetting things and they're not paying attention to things. So they're always misplacing their glasses and their pens and everything. That person is absent-minded. Just mind, like your brain, M-I-N-D, with an E-D ending, to be absent-minded. I have to work really hard on that one.
Is there a hyphen between absent-minded? Is that one of the...
Some people put a hyphen there, and some people write it as one word. There's a tendency to omit hyphens, not use hyphens in many places where we used them before, but I think it's still not really a stable usage.
So you'll see both. When Stevenson's health improved, he set his sights on, and then the reason why I said determined is because when you set your sight on something, that means you're determined to do it. And then pursuing a life of travel and adventure, it means that he wanted to follow a life of travel and adventure.
Right. And some people just decide to do that instead of following the conventional, that means ordinary expectations and rules like, well, you go through school, you take all these tests, you get into the next level of school, and then you go into the next level of school after that, then you graduate, you go and get a good job, and you buy a house, and you get a wife, etc., etc. That's the conventional rules. So instead of following all those conventional rules, Stevenson decided that he wanted to live life to the fullest.
And here in the beginning, when Stevenson's health improved, a lot of times we start sentences kind of like with a transition into it, but it kind of gives a setting of his situation. So a lot of my non-English speaking friends, they'll be confused. Like, why did it start with when Stevenson's health improved instead of just starting with he set his sights on pursuing a life of travel and adventure? Well, it's because, right when you see that at the very get-go, at the very beginning, then you'll know that with everything being said afterwards, it's with the setting of him being sick.
So a period of time has passed, and there's also been a change. He isn't quite so sick anymore. He still wasn't really well, but he was well enough that he could travel.
So in the next sentence, when we see rebellious, okay, did you ever go through a rebellious period in your life?
Absolutely. How about you?
I think I tried, but then I got too chicken.
Yeah. I guess people can be rebellious in many different ways.
Yes. So when we say rebellious, that means like when you're causing trouble or when you're just not doing what you're supposed to do as a child, as an adult. You can be any age, right?
One way kids rebel now is they might go get a tattoo.
Yes, that's like the number one way of being rebellious.
But I don't consider that very rebellious because everybody does it.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Well, hopefully when you're sober. Like some people do it when they're not sober.
And they regret it.
They do. My brother is one of those examples. So.
Oh, dear. Okay, right. And so, getting a tattoo is one way to make adults mad.
That's exactly right. And so here in this sentence, we have right after rebellious teen, it gives two examples with how he was rebellious. One, he grew his hair long. And then two, he turned his back on religion. So what is turning your back on something?
At the time, it was expected that everybody would accept Christianity and be a Christian and go to church and keep their religious belief.
So it's kind of like betraying his religion, right?
That's right. That he decided that I don't believe this stuff. And that was an outrageous thing. It was kind of a really brave thing to say at the time because people at the time could often lose their job if they said that they didn't accept Christianity.
That's pretty extreme back then.
It really was. But even now we have it in the States. We also have a lot of divisiveness. People disagree because of religion.
Yeah, it's the more things change, the more they stay the same sometimes, huh?
That's right. So we really have this background still in our culture now, especially in the U.S. It's also in Europe. They don't care as much in general. In the States, it's two very different groups who just don't agree.
Yeah, hopefully that would change one day, right?
Yeah. And this thing about growing your hair long to rebel, that happened in the 1960s and 70s. It was a big deal then. But then all guys had long hair, and it was no longer anything really rebellious.
It's funny how time changed, and then the culture changes, and then traditions change, and then sometimes they do a little cycle, you know?
Constantly cycle through. That's right. So those are two ways that he kind of broke the rules of the time, had long hair, and then he decided he didn't buy this religion thing.
The next sentence, the last one of this paragraph, when you turn to writing, that means that you start to depend on doing this thing. So he started to depend on writing to express his ideas and share his travel experiences with others.
Right. So that was his place in life. He wrote things and he wanted to tell other people about these great things that he found when he traveled. Okay, our last paragraph. One of Stevenson's most famous works is Treasure Island. We've already mentioned that's probably his most famous novel. It is a coming-of-age story about a young man who sets out on a quest to find a chest of buried treasure on a tropical island. Coming-of-age story is the story about somebody growing up and his adventures when he was going from being a child to an adult. And here it's a young man to set out on a quest. That means you've decided you have a goal. You want to go on an adventure. You want to try and conquer something. You want to achieve something. And the thing he wanted to do was find buried treasure inside of a chest way over on an island in the tropical part of the world.
So when we say set out, another word we often use is embark. E-M-B-A-R-K. And here we also see the word quest. And it's like a journey, basically. But when we hear the word quest, it makes us think a lot of like a big adventure is coming, or maybe dragons or something, science fiction. Like, it makes the journey sound a lot more colorful and dangerous.
Exactly. To capture the gold, however, he must get there before a crew of dangerous pirates. So he's not the only one who wants that treasure chest. There's a whole bunch of dangerous pirates who also want the gold, and frankly, I would not mess with them if it were me.
Neither would I.
Yeah, and get like an ear cut off or worse.
Yes.
So Stevenson came up with the idea for Treasure Island after he and his son drew an imaginary map on a rainy day. So the weather wasn't nice, they couldn't go out, and besides, he was probably still sick at that time. So they amused themselves. They did something fun indoors. They drew up a map they just made up, totally out of their heads.
So when you come up with something, it just means you thought of something, you created something.
The novel was also influenced by his recent trip to America.
So influenced by is another way to say affected by.
Although it's a work of fiction, many of the characters are based on real-life pirates, such as Blackbeard and William Kidd.
So earlier, Karen said based on real life. The reason why based on is because you can say based upon or based on. These are both perfectly acceptable. And in my opinion, I hear based on more often.
Right. Based upon sounds a little more formal.
Mm-mm-mm.
And so the characters that he wrote about, there were some pirates that actually existed called Blackbeard and William Kidd. And that's as far as we can go today. To find out what happens after this, you're going to have to tune in tomorrow, and I hope you do that.